Remission application. I know that the chair of the Strategy and Finance Committee does not want to move this recommendation from the committee. I have raised with the Chief Executive that in future for papers, when we actually need the resolution as moved and seconded by the committee, so that it would have been plain. It should be plain on the face of this record that it was not supported by the chair. Because I think that's a significant issue for the council's consideration. But in order to, are there any questions that people have got that they'd like to seek clarification from our staff? And then I'm going to ask whether anyone is prepared to move the Strategy and Finance Committee recommendation. And then I guess the default position is the staff recommendation. So some questions, yeah. Pauline and Phil.
Yes, thank you. Just on 4.11, that the council considers that owners of red zone properties will have received reimbursement of any DCs paid as a component of payment received in the acquisition of a red zone property. Do we know if they have received any compensation? If St Paul's received compensation from the Crown when they acquired the land?
We don't know for sure, and I don't know that when the deputation before the committee that they could confirm whether that was a component of their offer. But we do know, we've got an example of a valuer contacting the council to ask about the amount of development contribution levy or credit that would be available on a piece of land, because they were going to factor that into the value they were putting on the piece of land for a Crown offer for that land. So that's in a different situation, but we are aware that. Was it in
residential red zone area?
Not residential red zone, it was...
Well, we heard from them that they got the 2007 rating valuation, so that wouldn't have a valuation attached to it. I asked them the question, what was the basis for their payment? And they said the 2007 rating valuation, which I assume was just for the land.
Yeah. So at a general level, though, I guess the value of a piece of land that's been developed or subdivided already has an underlying credit, development contributions credit, and that is relevant to the value of that land.
His rating valuation for 2007 included the development contribution that would have been paid for development, even though it was in a residential area?
Well, I'm just saying the general, so not the specific value or valuation method, but somebody coming along to buy that land later on does not have to pay a development contribution already over again. That's because right. It already has an underlying DCQE credit attached to it.
That's right.
And at some level that has a value to it. Somebody doesn't have to pay that development contribution over again.
Just on that though.
But sorry, just continuing that they will have received reimbursement. This is what the council expects, that they would have received reimbursement.
No, that's what they considered. That's what council considers.
This is the wording that's in the council's policy as the reasoning for why we wouldn't do a transfer of credits or why we treat red zones.
I mean, the thing is they would receive a reimbursement if they were building back on that site.
No, they wouldn't receive a reimbursement. They would be allowed a credit.
Yes.
Yeah.
If they rebuild,
they're not reimbursed. It sits with the land.
Yes.
A red zone credit sits with the land until it's used on that site or it expires. So in actual fact, the person that currently holds, maybe this is a question, can you confirm that the person that actually currently holds the credit for the previous site is the Crown?
Yes.
Yes, if the Crown still owns that land, which I assume they do, yes, they have the credit.
So they hold the credit?
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
And just on that, just a further one, how long before or has it expired, the credit?
10 years.
10 years.
That's according to the policy.
5
stands at present.
Thank you.
Yeah. Phil and then Andrew.
Look, I just want to clarify any possibility of this, what's in clause 411, and especially with red zone credits being transferred, is there anything there that in fact would mean that if council was to grant a remission for the school, that in fact it would make it illegal?
I don't believe so. The clause about no red zone credits being transferred or sold in the policy is about the underlying credits of the land not being transferred. The remissions clause in the policy is about granting a remission of the DC charge. So they're two separate concepts.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you, Judith. That answers that question.
Yeah. Paul, you had a...
Oh, no, it's just actually just to give some context to the credit. So if, for example's sake, they intensified that land, they would pay the extra for the intensification.
Yeah, it's only for what was there before.
That's right.
Yeah.
And on the
Andrew.
same side.
Thank you. With relation on page 243 to clause 7.5.2, the statement there is that the decision could be made to approve a reduction if the council agrees with the bishop. So that's the bishop's letter in 4.1, referred to in 4.12 and 4.13 on the page 241, that if the council agreed that there were unique and compelling circumstances, then we could agree to the inconsistency with the policy.
I think, I mean, you'll see there we talk about it as potentially inconsistent with clause 2.3. As I've just explained, it actually deals with a different subject matter, the credits compared to the actual DC charge that's being charged. So there's a potential inconsistency. It's not I think this was put in there to just highlight that, but yes, certainly if you find that there's unique and compelling circumstances under that remissions clause, then you can grant a remission.
Yeah, and then my second question related to any issue of precedent setting. Presumably, if this is seen to be a unique situation, and I think there are arguments that it is, that would then limit any precedent that would come out of this because of the uniqueness of this situation. Thank you.
I'll just... Glenn. Thank you, Mrs. Mayor.
Councillor Livingston, I presume.
Yes, I'm still trying to think of a reply to every time you say that. But just due to page 243, looking at discretion 4.9, so that's simply what it says. It means it's situational, depends from case to case, doesn't necessarily set a precedent. Would that be your
The remissions clause of the policy?
Yes, where it says at its sole discretion.
Of 3.6.2, yes.
How do we interpret that?
Okay, well, so the discretion is with the council, and I think that you all were circulated a memo I did for the chief financial officer. So there was a bit more detail there about considering unique and compelling, and yes, I think if a situation is unique,
just from case to case,
it's not going to set a precedent.
Okay. All right. Yep.
Good. Okay. So would someone like to move the Strategy and Finance Committee recommendation or the staff recommendation?
I'm happy to move the committee recommendation.
Committee recommendation, Andrew, seconded.
And I'll second it.
Phil. So I'll open that up for debate. Andrew.
To me, this is almost a legal question, whether this is unique and compelling, and referring to clauses 4.12 and 4.13, I tend to agree that it is, and the reasons for that I agree with are set out in those two clauses. And the other clause that I referred to in my question, 7.5.2, is certainly the other clause in the report that supports our ability to make that decision. So I think it's important that we stick to the facts of this particular case, and we look at the considerations that would allow us to come to a particular conclusion. There's a wider context that we could take into account, but in terms of that question, is it unique, is it compelling, I believe the answer to both of those questions is yes, and that's the reason that I'm supporting the committee recommendation.
Glenn?
Thank you. I just wish to offer a perspective from Ward as well as City, that for Dallington, the first quake of September the 4th, literally travelled through this church, so it broke it at that point. That left Dallington without any recognised community focal point, to the extent that when the February 22nd event came along, that we ended up with a shipping container as a community hub in a community that was about to lose half of its residential dwellings. My question would be, isn't that sufficient to meet the unique and compelling test in relation to the rest of the city? On this, we can see in another report, page 198, 4.21, it's not as if this will necessarily deplete revenue from DCs either. We're already ahead with the DCs. But that's not really the point. The point here is, does it meet the unique and compelling test? I can't think of any other place in the city that's been affected in this way. This is situational. We do have discretion, and I urge you please to support the option to approve the remission.
Ali?
Well, with respect to my colleagues, I would rather be taking the advice of staff who say that the circumstances outlined do not appear to be unique and compelling, and that is why I won't be supporting this. I think the danger here is that we're setting a precedent, and I can think of several emails I've received in the last 2 years that would argue that their position is unique and compelling as well, and could they have DCs have DC remissions too. So I think we're walking on very thin ice with this, and as I said, as I started, I would rather put my decision in the hands of staff who have advised, in fact, that this is not unique and compelling.
Paul?
Look, I agree with Councillor Jones. I don't see anything unique and compelling about this here, and I'm certain that if we agree to this today, to what's been up on the board here, we will have other ones come out of the ground that actually will say they're unique, and they'll come back and seek some recompense from the council. So I won't be supporting this today.
Jamie?
Yeah, thanks. Look, fundamentally, this has been an argument about whether or not this situation is unique and compelling, and from my perspective, I just don't believe that it is unique and compelling enough to justify the precedents that would be created around it. You know, do I think this is a good cause? Of course I do. And do I think it would be positive to allow the church to have more money in their back pocket to put into educational facilities on this site? Absolutely. You know, it's positive, but the earthquake, whilst it was unique, you're all unique, just like everyone else in the world. And everyone was affected by the earthquake, and everyone has got a story, and everyone can tug on the heartstrings, and everyone can make a compelling case. And we have policy in place for a reason. The fact of the matter was, there was a DC credit on that land in the red zone. We understand what's happened with that, and that's been paid out. But the point of DCs is simply a user or causer pays scheme to be able to fund the infrastructure that is required when increased demand is placed on that infrastructure that is underground. There are lots of places in the city where there will be DC credits. They've chosen not to locate on the site where there is a DC credit. They've chosen to locate on a site that the infrastructure below the ground does not have the adequate capacity for the increase in demand that's going to be placed on that infrastructure. Hence, they're going to pay for it. If we decide for them not to pay that, that means everyone else in the city is going to be paying for that. And that means that the causer is not paying for that infrastructure which needs to be upgraded. I think the precedent is a dangerous one, and I also think that the situation isn't necessarily compelling enough either, because they actually have the money in the bank. They've got the money there to pay the DC sitting in their bank account, which they said at the committee. Further to that, the settlement was actually not a settlement on capital value. The settlement that they got, which they told us at the committee meeting, was that they settled on land value and land value alone. They then had a quantity surveyor negotiate with the insurer on the above ground assets. Now, any quantity surveyor that is half capable at their job will be arguing every single bit of added value that they can squeeze out of a claim. So whether you have a resource consent that's there that hasn't been executed, whether you have credits in the form of development contributions, you will be putting all of that to your insurer, and the Catholic Church got a global settlement. There is no way that a quantity surveyor would not argue the value. There is no way they would say, no, please don't pay me the extra additional funds that we have owing on this. That's the point of taking the land value and then negotiating directly for your insurer with a global settlement. They've done that. They've got the money in the bank. They've chosen a site which does not have the capacity for the infrastructure or the added demand on the infrastructure that they've chosen to create. And going against the user pays situation on a very, very clear policy which actually verbatim says that specifically state integrated schools are required to pay development contributions, I just believe sets a terribly dangerous precedent, because we will hear unique and compelling story after unique and compelling story for the end of our days if we go down this route. And I think the staff advice is prudent for very good reason.
David.
Look, I was going to expand upon development contributions and their value and why they're there, but I think Councillor Goff has probably said everything and more that I would have said, so I'll just refrain from further comment and just state that won't be supporting the remit.
Phil.
So, in fact, in terms of particularly schools in Christchurch, this is clearly, actually, a unique incident. What happened to this St Francis, the combined St Francis School and the original Dellington School being shifted, is absolutely unique. It was the only school in Christchurch which was required to shift because it was red zone. So they couldn't have possibly, stayed on in the red zone land or rebuilt on the red zone land. So it is unique. It's also compelling in that they had no option, actually. They were forced and, in fact, required to move somewhere else. That's absolutely compelling. So there is a clear case that, in fact, for St Francis of Assisi School, it was both, the circumstances were both unique and compelling. I think, it's easy to say, well, the church has money in their back pocket. In fact, we as a council allow DC rebates for developers in the central city. They have money in their back pockets. They wouldn't always necessarily tell us what they had in their back pockets, but that's like a subsidy which they also receive, actually. So, and what I understood the staff to say is, in fact, this is an exception, and that it doesn't necessarily create a precedent at all, because this is a particularly unusual situation. I want to say too that if these children were attending a state school, and it had been a state school which was forced to move, that school would not be paying DCs. The Crown, as you read in the report, is not obliged to pay our development contributions. I also want to refer to the whole point of the Private Schools Integration Act, and that's that kids and Catholic integrated schools, they actually have equal rights to kids in state schools. And so, I think that the argument if the arguments against this, in fact, what it means is that if council doesn't support this today, that in fact these children, compared with their state school colleagues, they would be discriminated against. And I think, in fact, that isn't the way this council does things at all. So I'm urging the council to support what was the original committee recommendation.
Raf?
Yeah, just briefly, I think Jamie sort of covered most of the points around the DCs. I think for me, I would have had to see some evidence of significant financial hardship here to see this as a compelling case, and we haven't got any. The church made the decision to build the extra classrooms. They would have known the DCs involved in that process. They have the money in the bank account. They're proposing to use this cash, if it's remitted, for general facility improvement at schools around Christchurch City. So it just doesn't pass for me that compelling test just on that basic requirement. So I get letters every day from people asking for rates remissions, often with very, very compelling stories. Major financial hardship, people paying rates on multiple properties because they're not repaired in time for health issues, and you really actually think those people are struggling. They don't have the cash. The church does have the cash. They've told us they've got the cash. They should pay the DCs.
I want to comment as well. As I said at Strategy and Finance, this was a really hard issue to actually formulate an opinion on, because it really could be either way. I mean, I even said that I was kind of sitting on the fence. I didn't really know which way that I should go on it, because to me it is a unique situation. When you're the only school that's been red zoned, you know, it's unique. So I think the unique is certainly passed. And I thought that the compelling side of it was the fact that they really were faced with no option of going back to the site where they were. So they had to look for an alternative place. They chose an existing school site and turned two schools into one school. So the new St Francis of Assisi school took over from the two schools that previously existed, but quite some distance from Dallington, which is where its home was. And I know that the school community actually didn't want that amalgamation to occur on the Innes Road side. But that was the decision that was made by the church, and it's theirs to make. And I think they did that in a way that was an effective use of their land, because they only had to build 2 additional classrooms in order to meet the needs of the expanded school. So they went through a good process, but as others have pointed out, they are perfectly aware of the development contributions obligations, because they've set the money aside to pay should this decision not go through. They then, so for me, unique and compelling, you can argue that both of those tests are met. But then I come back to the plain wording of 2.3, which I guess I hadn't really worked through at the time of the meeting, which is that residential and non-residential lots within an area classified by Sarah as red zone that are subsequently demolished will retain the assessed credit with the lot. So it stays with the site, not moves. No red zone credits can be transferred or sold, but will remain with the land until they are used on that site or they expire. And we know from the policy that they expire after 10 years. I'm not sure when that transfer was actually made, but it wouldn't have been made before. It wouldn't have been made before 2012, I'm guessing. Would be the first transfers under the residential red zone. I know Dallington was pretty close. It was one of the first suburbs to be red zoned, but I no, actually they didn't. They only did residential properties to start with. So actually it was probably a wee bit later. So there's another at least 7 years probably sitting there on that site, which is right on the edge of the red zone, available for development on that site. So the question that we're being asked to consider is really something that's against this policy, but through another means, which is remitting the development contributions. The council considers that owners of red zone properties will have received reimbursement of any development contributions paid as a component of payment received in the acquisition of a red zone property. Well, we've been through a global settlement, and I mean we have to accept that it's ins and outs and ups and downs, and you know, in the total scheme of things, it's probably neither here nor there. But that's the basis for our policy. But that means that the red zone credits actually are owned by the government, and they sit on that land with the government. And if the Catholic Church feels that it hasn't had a fair consideration of their situation, then really they need to look to central government, because that's who owns the credit. So although I supported the passing of the resolution at the Strategy and Finance Committee, on further reflection, I feel that the overbalancing test of the development contributions policy has not been met, so I won't be supporting the resolution. So I suspect that there's a split vote, so could we have the, have we not got the system working? We have a
You put your digit in the
Shall we put our hands up? So those in favour of the resolution as moved by Councillor Turner, Councillor Clearwater, could you please raise your hand? Have you ticked everyone? Turner, Scandrett, Clearwater. No, there's seven.
Seven.
Yeah. Cotter, Livingston, Johansson, and Chen. There's 7 all. And then opposed. Also 7. So the motion is not carried, which means that the development contributions cannot be remitted. Is that right?
Yes, it reverts to status quo,
Yeah, status quo.
which would be the policy.
Often have 7 all. No. All right. So we will move forward.